There's a moment most of us hit that nobody really warns us about. It's not dramatic. It does not come with a breakdown or a big failure. It usually shows up quietly. You look around and realize no one is coming to rescue you from this season. No one is going to suddenly give you clarity, discipline, confidence, or direction. Not your boss, not your partner, not a mentor, not the next opportunity. And honestly, listeners, I know that realization it can feel heavy. But then it can also be the beginning of real leadership. And today's conversation is about that moment. The moment where self leadership stops being a motivational phrase and it becomes a requirement. Welcome, everyone, back to another interesting episode on the BizBlend podcast. I'm your host, Sana, and today, my guest, she helps people stop settling for fine and start building lives and businesses that actually feel aligned, powerful, and free. Her work focuses on creating personal and professional infrastructure that supports growth instead of chaos, especially during transitions, reinvention, and leadership expansion. So, listeners, this is not about hustle. It is not about pretending you are strong all the time. It is about learning how to lead yourself when things are uncertain, uncomfortable, and unglamorous. So let's get into it and let's welcome our guest, Tiffanie Janowitz. Tiffanie, welcome to BizBlend, and I'm really honored to have you.
Thanks so much, Santa. It's great to be here.
And Tiffanie, this is I mean, unfortunately, it is kind of the reality that, many of us, we don't realize or we realize very late. And I think maybe for some it feels like, there is no other option out there, and they leave everything to fate or maybe the higher power, or some people, they take control in their own hands and they carve their own path in there. So, many people talk about self leadership like, it is empowering, but then for many, the real moment it begins, it feels lonely and confronting. So, my question to you is, Tiffany, when someone realizes that no one is coming to save them, what do you see emotionally and practically happen first?
And this is such a deep topic, Santa, because
Yeah.
when we're talking about when you're realizing that no one is coming to save you, a reframe is really necessary in that first space, right? When we're thinking about the concept of no one's coming, it's not repositioning that to remind yourself that it's not a threat, but this is a transfer of power back to yourself, right? We're not, when we think about that, like most people are unconsciously waiting for the right time, or I need more motivation, or someone, again, like that outside source of someone coming to choose them, or even maybe for permission. A lot of folks that I work with, that I mentor, permission is a big one that even just having the conversation between the two of us when we're working through and taking that first inventory. Permission is something I hear from a lot of the people that I mentor that are sitting in that space of fine, which is a really scary spot to sit in. But we're unconsciously waiting for permissions or outside sources. And so again, really peeling it back to remind yourself that it's not a threat, that no one's coming to save you. You are your biggest power, and transferring that power back into your hands and wrapping your arms around it is when you get to take that back into your hands. And when we're thinking about the people that are unconsciously waiting for those. It's not like that they're weak, right? But we get into these situations, and oftentimes when people are raised, we're outsourcing our opinions or even the leadership of our life. And what I mean by that is, when you think about when you're growing up, you are shaped by so many things outside yourself. You're shaped by
Mm.
your home, your surroundings, your social settings, the people that are leading you, whether that's inside your home or in, religious circles or wherever that is. There is a lot of outside influence in our lives. And so when there's a spot to take back those decisions and put them in our hands, that's when I think people get stuck in that space. And it's typically like what I have found is there's like three invisible traps of why people stay stuck. And when I go through those, it's typically like there's some emotional delegation that they get trapped into, right? And what I mean by that is like a thought of I'll take action once I feel ready or once I get that right motivation or whatever, right? When in reality, when you're looking at true leadership, you act before you have certainty. We all know like action is the key dictator of all of our 1% leaders,
Mm.
right? It's taking
Mm.
action, massive action, and quick. So emotional delegation is kind of one of the traps that I see people get into. The second one would be like responsibility avoidance. And that can be disguised by like an overwhelming feeling, right? So when we're thinking to ourselves, I don't even know where to start. There is so much information out in our world right now that overwhelm is easy to come by. There's too many choices, too many decisions. A lot of what I find with people is they don't have framework, right?
Mm.
So it's not a lack of ability, but it's more of where do I need to direct this, right? And then that last trap that I really see people fall into is external validation. The external validation, and we fall into a loop of that. We want people to applaud us or to agree with us, and we're nervous about if I change this behavior or, what are people going to think of me rather than we really need to lead ourselves, and we don't need others' consensus. We just need our own. We need to again transfer that power right back into our own hands.
Mm. And that external validation and that fear that if I fail or if I cannot live up to even my expectations, then what are others going to think about me or to say about me?
Mhm. Yeah. It's a unique position because just as we were mentioning that there's so many external factors
Mhm.
that come into play growing up and everything. Another another thing that I've really noticed, is we're often taught to change our lens outward instead of
Mm.
inward. And
Mm.
so when I say to someone that I'm working with, we're gonna flip that lens back inward, that's an uncomfortable thing for a lot of people because
Yeah.
it's not our usual viewpoint. And and so relearning and again reframing that that's okay and you are your best leader, but it starts with you. That's a
Mm.
really powerful moment for someone to realize within themselves.
Absolutely. And I think entrepreneurship is such I shouldn't say perfect, but such a great example of this because um often people say that it's a lonely journey and
Uh-huh.
um you I mean most probably you are there could be chances that maybe your first company or your first venture is not is has failed, but that
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that you stop having ideas or bringing the ideas into fruition and solving problems out there. And because those failures are the biggest kind of lessons to learn what you shouldn't do instead of what you should do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when we can embrace those failures and we can love them just as much as our wins, that becomes a superpower. And
Mm.
that's a real piece of when I work with people to build their infrastructure more sound and get that foundation working as it should, and we're talking about habits, that is, what you said, Senna, it hits it right on the head, is being okay to fail is, again, it's a learned skill. And it's something that you've gotta come to terms with, but learning how to fail and being okay to fail over and over, and instead of coming out of that failure with shame and negative feelings, coming out of that failure with the hungry mindset of, "What did I learn from that? What can I not repeat? Or what can I do differently to make sure that that failure doesn't become a repetitive pattern?" But instead becomes that superpower. Now we're talking about self-leadership.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Tiffany, I mean, I have to bring this up because your journey, it is a proof here that, because you have had, maybe, I mean, not only in the professional world, but in the personal, in your personal life as well, like, moving away from relationships that no longer connected with you, your values. Then, you navigated entrepreneurial journey as well.
Yeah.
Health problems as well, health challenges. So if you would like to share a bit about your journey with all of the list, go on. And
Yeah. So to kind of give listeners a bit of context, I've rebuilt my life multiple times. And I don't mean that in a negative light, but
Mm.
when something no longer feels aligned, when we give ourselves the power to shed layers and again, embrace what didn't, what no longer serves us and what no longer feels aligned, it gives ourselves the power to be able to shift that and realign with ourselves. And when we are in true alignment, that's when we really shine from the inside out. And that might sound a little bit a little bit crazy, but that's what really gives yourself, true trust in your inner voice. And that's become a really big, importance in my journey. As you mentioned, I was in corporate America for a very long time, but I just had this, and I had a great job. I was in a really, successful career path. My trajectory was great. But at the end of the day, I was just left feeling fine. And when we're in a state of fine, that really is like, it's a state of stagnance. And I think that that's a really dangerous place to stay. I kept feeling like there's something more that I'm meant to pour into this world and myself and others, and there's something bigger that I'm meant to be doing. And so, because I had really learned to listen to my voice, I stepped out of corporate America and I stepped into entrepreneurship. And as you mentioned, entrepreneurship is a lonely journey. It can be a lonely journey because every person's journey in entrepreneurship looks different. When I talk to one entrepreneur, our day is not the same as far as scheduling and what we have to tackle each day. And that's when you really have to rely on yourself of, what are you following through with, especially when nobody is watching, when you don't have a corporate framework to be telling you what's next, and you have to rely on that, on your own self. Have you built that self voice loud enough to not only trust it, but respect it? And so in the professional setting, I've really been able to hone in on that, which then gave me the power with, when we're talking about my personal side of things. I mean, I just exited a journey with breast cancer that I would not have. I had my concerns dismissed several times, and I was told that I was fine several times. But because I was able to really listen to my inner voice and I had trusted that and I respect my inner voice enough, it gave me the courage to push back to, professionals that I'm really relying on their professional opinion and their guidance, and to have the courage to say, I think there's more here. Can we peel this back a little bit further? And because I was able to do that, I mean, it saved my life because my breast cancer diagnosis didn't come until I kept pushing that we needed more testing. And so, I mean, we're covering the spectrum of business and personal, but it all starts with that inner voice that, to circle that back to where we started, that is like no one's developing that inner voice for you. That has to come in your own hands.
Hmm. No, that is true. That is true. And sometimes it, comes as this, like we popularly call it as intuition, that
Mhm.
something here connects with me. Something here feels like, yes, I can do this. At least, let's try it out. Let's try it out.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think to your point, Sarah, that is exactly where people need to start. Let's try. Try, something over nothing. And that
Hmm.
really is where that gets to start of, if again, like nobody's watching, this doesn't count for anybody else except for me. So what is one small thing that I can fulfill with on that, or what do I feel like is still the right move, no matter what anybody else is looking at?
Yeah, yeah. And I think, um, needless to say, it's surely a test. Um, or maybe I think it's kind of that, the the moments, when you have so many voices, so many opinions, do that, do this, or this is not going to work out, but still your inner voice is telling you, no, let's stick to what I have decided, what I'm thinking right now.
Yeah.
And you mentioned about the lack of framework. So that's where I want to focus next, Tiffany. That we're talking, because so many conversations on BizBlend and other podcasts that I have, like there are many frameworks out there. So for someone who has um not a single approach, um but is right now flooded by some uncertain circumstances, they don't have any clue like what's the next step to take, or maybe if they genuinely want to have a framework, or if they want to identify what exactly is my way of working or my way of approach, are there any simple steps that can be followed? And this is irrespective of your professional personal life.
Yeah. Yeah. As a blanket answer, yes. There are some simple steps that then we can take. And the first thing that I think people need to be really conscious of is when you are getting that feeling that you are just describing, that feeling of overwhelm or that feeling of like, where do I start?
Mm.
The thing that I really want to pat people on the back for is you are becoming aware. In that circumstance where you feel the overwhelm, that is when you are starting to, um, condense and start to peel away some of the chaos, right? When you feel that overwhelm, you are aware, and we can't change anything, and we can't shift anything to the right framework or step into any type of framework without the awareness. So that's where I really like to stop people in that moment and say, "Hey, good job." Like, recognize this moment for yourself that, yes, I want to shift something and I'm aware of it enough that I need to find a framework. And it's okay to feel overwhelmed and be looking for like, okay, where do I start? But having that recognition in yourself of, oh my gosh, this doesn't have to stay like this forever. That is a powerful moment that I really like to say to people. Be aware of that and give yourself, the credit for that first move because you just showed yourself, I don't have to stay here anymore. And then to step into the infrastructure building of things.
Mm.
When we're talking about self-leadership and taking those first steps, for me, it's all about systems, right? And when we're talking about that's just another fancy word of saying framework, systems, it's all of those kind of things. But
Yeah.
what framework and systems creates for you is it removes your emotion, and it removes like the need for motivation and willpower to be
Yeah.
behind the desire for the change, right? Because we can't rely on motivation. If we're relying on motivation, there will be failure at some point because motivation fades, right?
Mm.
But when we create systems behind things and when we create that infrastructure, both on the personal and the business side, now we're talking about a secret weapon because that takes the emotional swing out of it. So when that motivation is fading or when exhaustion is hitting in or, when the pressure hits, all of those emotional swings tend to make us want to sit back into old habits or old self, as I like to call that. Like my old self would really default to pressing the snooze button, but that doesn't serve the identity that I am aligning with in my new growth, right? And so I like to think of it as like a triangle, right? When we're talking about a new habit or a step forward that we're taking, tying that to the identity that we're wanting to step. And I think that that is really where I ask people to start is when you're saying, okay, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I don't have the framework in place right now. Where do I start? I want you to start with a simple visualization of in a perfect world, and we're not doing any type of judgment right now. We're just taking inventory and we're painting a picture. And what I mean by that is in a perfect world, what does this new identity look like of what we're shifting away from? So let's think of if I'm wanting to put better sleep and eating patterns in my life, I am going to identify that with, not something negative like, oh, I hit the snooze button all the time. I have a really bad habit that I'm breaking with the snooze button, right? But instead, I'm going to frame that with my health is a priority for me. And so I no longer hit the snooze button. And I'm someone who values my health. I'm creating an identity for myself that's what I'm reaching for instead of something of default, like, a negative connotation with this, a negative correlation with the habit. But when we really paint that identity, it allows us to then reverse engineer what habits, number one, need to be in place to start to take the steps towards that new identity. But and then based on those habits, we put the infrastructure in place. So let's break it down to someone that like the concept of running, for example. This is a really, it's an easy one to be able to identify if, people to identify with this. If I am someone who I'm not a runner, I don't move my body at all, but my goal is to run a marathon. I'm certainly not going to put my running shoes on and go and try and run 26 miles today, right? I'm simply going to look at, I wonder what running shoes fit my feet well,
Mm.
right? It's just something very small that we're talking about something over nothing, the concept of something very, over nothing. I love how James Clear breaks down all of this in his book, Atomic Habits. I think it's a really, really powerful tool. So if you're listening and you haven't read that book, put that on your must read. I think it's a wonderful part to put these baby steps into place. It takes a lot of the overwhelm out of that, right? But then we start to build on those things. Okay, I've researched the shoes and now I'm going to put them on my feet and I'm going to simply walk to the end of my street and back. And if that feels good and I've proved to myself that I can, I've put the trust in my own inner voice that I can do this. Well, maybe tomorrow I'm going to walk around my whole neighborhood. And maybe then after that, I'm going to pick up my speed. And it's a building process that it's just one brick on top of another. And we're not looking at the whole big picture because that's certainly when overwhelm and a lack of action tends to come into place.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, so
Mm. I think it's a very, very good and simple example that you gave, Tiffany, because um, we often, whenever we try to, um, get out of that old self. Okay, from tomorrow onwards, I'm going to go for a run. We try to, like, because initially you have that motivation on fire, like energy brimming. You are excited because you're doing something new. Your brain, your whole body, physically, emotionally,
Yes.
are absolutely motivated. But then when that kind of motivation fades, it starts to fade away, and you feel like, okay, this is really tiring, or maybe there is some kind of, once again, a huge challenge in your way, or maybe your schedule is not the way that you expected.
Yeah.
Gradually, slowly and gradually, it fades away. Your running stops and it's done. And I think that's how most of the even New Year resolutions, they do not find any place, when we see at the middle of the year.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've been laughing because I've been saying if motivation worked, January would fix everybody.
Exactly.
And it just it's not something that you can rely on, you know? And Santa, to your point, you just described like that that ebb and flow and those peaks and valleys, you just described entrepreneurship. That is something that like it's not an if, but it is a when. When those roadblocks come and when those setbacks come, how quickly do you recover?
Mm,
And
definitely. And I think
in those moments yeah, I was just gonna say in those moments, that's when if the right systems are in place and you don't have to rely on your emotion or the motivation to kick back in, that's when we are making it easier on ourselves, and that's sustainability.
exactly. I think that exactly explains this, the need of infrastructure over willpower.
Mhm. Yeah. So I think a good question for people to start with and ask, is where am I waiting to be rescued instead of taking ownership? And if we need to reframe that, maybe it's more so something around like, is there a failure that I've been looking at as a roadblock or with negative feelings that I can turn around and turn into a superpower? How can I leverage it instead of shut it down? Your data is all in front of you. And that's the most beautiful part about all of this is because yes, no one is coming to save you, but that's the best news of your life because you are the solution to anything that is holding you back. So where can I make this easier? Where can I flip the script and flip the lens and turn this inward?
That is so true. That is so true. And this really reminds me of another conversation I recently had, I think 2, 3 days back, with another guest on BizBlend. By the way, listeners, stay tuned for that episode as well. But we were having a discussion on financial literacy, and how he rebuilt his life with a debt of almost $370,000. Like, um, he I mean, he got the eviction notice and everything, and of course, I shouldn't divulge everything. But then, um, he had no water because, of course, the water connection was cut. So he had to go out, and there was, I think, a water line that was connected. So he took a cold shower, and that kind of helped him realize that the problem, he is the problem, and then he's also the solution.
Yes, that's the most beautiful armor that you can have, understanding that.
Amazing, amazing. And Tiffany, before we wrap up, one final question. Like, you help people reclaim time, energy, confidence, and agency. So
Yeah.
out of these four, which do you think people misunderstand the most when it comes to self leadership?
Time. Absolutely.
Oh my goodness.
When
Exactly. That's
time
what I was thinking.
when you become, when you are reacting to your time instead of being the one who is delegating your time, that is a slippery slope, and when you flip that script and you take your time into your own hands and you delegate it, oof, that's a superpower. That's one that is gonna be a big game changer when people can understand how to direct that. You gain back more time than you can even imagine. It's a really powerful exercise I go through with people.
Hmm. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. 100% agree with you. Oh, superb, superb. So Tiffany, if listeners, I'm very sure they'll have so many thoughts, questions, and if they would like to reach out to you, what would be the easiest way for that?
The best way to reach out is through my website, and it's tiffanyjanowitz.com, but of course, I'm gonna throw a little curve in there. Tiffany is with an IE and not a Y, so there's a little some spelling to pay attention to, but
Mhm.
that's the best place to find me, or over on Instagram at tiffany.janowitz, and again, it's in a space of wanting to stop just surviving, but really start leading yourself. And that's what I help people build. That's the framework that I help people build. So if I can be, a support to you, please reach out. It's something that I feel a great responsibility to help others do because of the success that I have felt and seen in my own life and with others. So
Well, that's really good to hear. And listeners, what I'm going to do is I'll have all the links, all the details in the show notes. So find them attached along with this episode on whichever platform you're listening to the BizBlend podcast. And, listeners, I hope that what we can take away from here, all of us, is self leadership is not about being fearless, it is about being present. And you may not have everything figured out, but then it is about choosing yourself even when the path is unclear. Because no one is coming to save you, but then this is not a sentence or anything to have fear. It is an invitation to build a life and a way of working that actually supports who you are becoming. So, Tiffany, thank you so much. This was really, really a very profound and very much needed conversation in today's day and age. So, thank you so much.
thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
And to all the listeners, if this conversation resonated with you, take one idea and apply it. Not everything, just one, baby steps. Because leadership begins in the smallest moments of follow through. And thank you for tuning in and thank you for leading this conversation with so much honesty and depth. This is your host, Sana, and I'll catch you in the next episode on BizBlend. Thank you and take care.